Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today. Again, we've moved all our events to virtual. My name is Simran and I'm with Canopy. Canopy is a co-working space based in San Francisco. And I'll put our link, our little website in the chat box so you can check us out. And today we have a great talk with Eric Corey-Fried, who's introduced my mutual friend, Richard, who's going to be joining us pretty soon. I think I see him. So Eric is the Senior Vice President of Sustainability at Can Design. He's also the author of 11 books, a global speaker, X-Prize Visioneer, and award-winning architect. And today he's going to be giving us a fun talk on sustainable buildings, amongst some other things. So Eric, I'm going to let you, well, before that, actually, so I'm going to give a little format of how it's going to happen. We'll have a Q&A session at the end of the talk. So if you have any questions, just type it in the chat box. And you can also digitally raise your hand. I'll put the instructions as to how to do that in the chat box also. So Eric, all you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for setting this up, and thank you all for coming. Like you, I'm at home. Where else would you be? But it's weird for me because normally I'm on a plane every week speaking somewhere around the country, and I've been having weird dreams about audiences clapping for me and not getting that in real life. So it's, I'm glad you're here. Going through withdrawal like every other comedian. All right, so I'm gonna show you some slides, and normally I would hear you laughing. So if you want to unmute so you can laugh, please do that because it makes it better for everybody. If you're shy or weird or whatever and you don't want to unmute, that's fine too. But it could be fun as a little bit of an experiment here. Also, I'll share the slides with all of you if you want, but if you like, you can take screenshots along the way and then we can talk about them afterwards in questions. But that's what I look like with clothes on. And as you heard, I'm head of sustainability for a very large firm, one of the 50 largest firms in the world, called Can Design. It's been rated by Fast Company as one of the 50 most innovative companies. It's normally in the top 10 to 15 of all architecture firms in terms of innovation and sustainability. And we've got offices all over the country. And then I live in Portland, Oregon, where we don't even have an office because I oversee all the offices anyway. So why do I need to live near one? And so what I'm trying to say is I'm kind of a big deal. That's kind of the point I'm trying to get across if you didn't understand that. And what's weird about it, it's weird to do sustainability at a corporate level now. It's very strange to talk about it now when obviously there are more pressing issues for everybody, including is there going to be a global depression coming up next week or not? And people are dying. And so we as a firm, since we do a lot of healthcare, we've been very quick and nimble around this. And so we've been developing resources around what hospitals can do in a COVID world. We've been providing lots of pro bono services to universities of how they can plan for opening in September. And in a weird way, we're busier than ever because we're using our design strategy to help people. But it's also a little kind of ridiculous. How do you design a student health center for university in the middle of a pandemic? And so one of the things that we always keep telling ourselves is let's just keep our heads about us because this will eventually all pass. So what I want to talk to you about today is how we leverage this disruption as a way to rethink normal and to really work on defining a new normal. Because the way that we innovate is broken. Most companies don't know how to innovate. They think they do, but they don't. And when they do, they end up getting mired down and bogged down in conventional thinking, conventional wisdom, and the old way of doing things. And what they should be seeing is innovation is a strategy for resilience and for really transforming their customers and their marketplace. There is a long history of companies that failed to innovate. We all know these stories. And we think back fondly to some of these companies. If you told me as a kid that Kodak would be out of business because They, they got overtaken in the photography department. I wouldn't believe you, obviously. But all of these companies failed to innovate. And as a result, history is littered with these examples of great things that just stagnated and stalled. And there's very few examples of companies that have taken innovation to a new level. And the one that comes up most is probably Apple. Think about their iPod Shuffle. Probably one of their most popular devices ever. And at the height of its popularity, Apple discontinued both the Shuffle and the Nano after a decade on the market. At the height of its popularity, when most companies would basically drive that into the ground and keep selling different colors and flavors forever until sales wore out, Apple said, we came up with something better, and they obviously have no compunction about jumping onto the next big innovation. For them, it was really understanding that every iPod should be an iPod Touch anyway, because the future was in ubiquitous mobile handheld computing. So how does this relate to buildings? Well, it relates to buildings because the history of architecture is really the history of technology. And I think we fail to kind of remember that. Think about the Great Pyramids, right? 5,000 years ago, they were really the height of the technology at the time, so much so that we're still not entirely sure how they did it. And there's competing theories of how they achieved it. I mean, yes, tens of thousands of slaves and human suffering help achieve things like that. But really, the technology of stacking these stones that came from far away, we still don't really fully understand how they did it. But it was the height of the technology. Fast forward a few thousand years, and we see in the Acropolis in Greece, those first temples were first made out of wood. When those wooden temples burned down, the Greeks then replaced them with temples made out of marble. And they recreated their wooden temples in marble and then painted them heavily to mimic what was once in wood, to make them more permanent. And now we still have remnants of them years later. Fast forward a few hundred more years, and then we have Gothic cathedrals, whose buttresses and arches were the height of the technology at the time, the most advanced thinking we had on design and technology. If you look at something like the Byzantine era and the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, again, the height of the technology, just pristine, amazing, incredible. And then this gave forth to the discovery of new materials like iron that led to crystal palaces and then eventually skyscrapers. The history of architecture is the history of technology. And then somewhere in the 20th century, we kind of got a little stuck, right? We got to a point of plasticity, but really that kind of ended in the middle of the modernism era. And then we're really just still kind of reiterating what we've done before. Now what we have today is really advancements in fabrication, but not really advancements in materiality or in spatial awareness. And so I think we're primed for a new innovation, and really one around technology. So how do you look at innovation in a way that fuels our spaces where we live and work and play? And that's really what I'm doing with my firm. I'm leading them through an innovation strategy towards sustainability. I'm not leading them through a sustainability strategy. It sounds the same, but it's not. I'm offering them a way to advance, not a way to green themselves up. We've tried greening ourselves up. It doesn't really work. So what I've discovered is that most teams, especially large firms, design firms, not just architects, but architects, engineers, designers, industrial designers, graphic designers, we're brainstorming the wrong way, we're working in teams the wrong way, and we're delivering our projects in the wrong way. And if you don't believe me, just think about the last meeting you were in and how bored out of your mind you were. How you were literally looking at the clock, waiting for it to end. And how some of you have gotten very good on these webinars that we've been in lately of finding new little white lies to tell of how to get out of another Zoom meeting. So I get it. We stay out of the sense of duty. There is a closely held assumption behind all bits of innovation. There's a closely held assumption behind most of the wrong decisions that a company makes. And there's, however, in hindsight, however crazy something sounds now, remember at the time, it seemed like a smart idea. And the trouble is conventional wisdom. Now, there are parts of conventional wisdom that make a lot of sense. Don't get me wrong, right? For example, waiting to go swimming after you eat, never eating an egg salad sandwich from a gas station, when ordering a call girl, always get a receipt. Those are all good bits of conventional wisdom, right? That you should stick to. Those are good rules of thumb. But for the most part in design, conventional wisdom is really death. Conventional wisdom is the opposite of that. Conventional wisdom is a set of cultural narratives that no longer really apply, a set of assumptions that are no longer true. For example, part of the reason why you're always cold in an office is because those standards were set in the 1950s for white men 6 feet tall, which most of us are not. That's why your office is always so cold, because it's based on a set of assumptions that we never questioned. Most of your cabinets are too high because those were set on standards of tall Swedish women from the 1800s. I don't know if you know that. It's a bit of trivia. And most toilet paper is too far in a hotel room, I think just because they're messing with us. I think that's really just the reason there. And I call, thank you, one person. I call all of this, all of these assumptions, all these bits of conventional wisdom that are kind of stopping our ability to innovate. I call these bits of conventional wisdom wisdom, because they're really becoming a roadblock to really opening up and thinking about things in a new way. And this wisdom has kept us in buildings that are wasteful and energy hogs and polluting and causing the climate crisis. We're still building buildings the same way that we have been for the last 200 years, more or less. And that's kind of the problem. And when you look at the current state of where we are, you really can't be surprised. We are not victims in this story. You have to understand that when you look at the current state of the world, a car-centric culture dependent on fossil fuels, very unhealthy and very inequitable, that ultimately was the plan. This is what we've wanted. This is 75 years of very specific policies to get us there. So we can't feel sorry for ourselves. This is what we've wanted. We didn't realize that in getting what we wanted, that we were going to essentially doom the human race at the same time. Because where are buildings a success? Where do they work? They're a failure in terms of energy, a failure in terms of health, a failure in terms of water, and among resources, they're the largest single contributor to landfill. They're a huge drain on our resources, and they're still relatively overly expensive for everybody. The only places buildings really work is in generating value for shareholders, really. And that's important, don't get me wrong, but everywhere else I would call it a failure. And so that's what we're up against. If you're working on sustainability in your company, this is what you're up against, this conventional wisdom, this old school of thinking that got us here. And it's very hard to get people to open up their mind and look at new ways. So what I want to give you is I want to give you some processes and rules of how I'm trying to do it. And I'm not saying it's a guarantee of success. I'm just showing you how I'm doing it. And then I'd love to hear from you how you're doing it. Because what I've seen is conventional wisdom gives us things like this. And this is what I would call a bad user experience. How many times, how many years do you think the people in this place have to go in and go, is this it? No. Is this it? No. Is this it? Oh, no. Right? And didn't even think up labels for it either. So this is a bad design. And these bits of conventional wisdom start creeping up everywhere. And we start getting sloppier in our work. Sometimes we don't even pay attention to the details. And nobody even stops to question, well, is that wrong? And as a result of this conventional wisdom, we end up with really things that kind of a failure. And we end up inventing things that probably shouldn't have been invented in the first place because nature already provided for us, but we just didn't think it through. We're so fixated on every food must get packaged that we kind of missed the point. That's the trouble. And so I collect these examples of failures of conventional wisdom everywhere because they're all over, they're all around us. Some of these jokes you won't get, by the way. It's fine. You'll get them later. It's fine. But, you know, there's also things that are just puzzling to me. Are these not really stairs? They're going to build them later? I don't understand this, the spirit of the stairs. Is this not really, is this a weird sculpture or something? Some sort of Dadaism that I don't understand? And then this one kind of makes sense because let's face it, he is asleep. So it's not really a security guard. So that there, at least it's warranted. And the conventional wisdom gets us doing these things almost out of habit without ever stopping to question if we should. And as a result, the interface is just horrific for things that I would think would have been obvious. Again, some of these jokes sneak up on you. It's fine. All right. So I landed in an airport once and I saw this sign, and I mean, technically it's not wrong. And then I expected to see this sign everywhere I looked. Everywhere I went, was I going to see this sign? And then I thought I was in some sort of weird, Salvador Dali film or something at some point. Conventional wisdom also backfires on us because sometimes people start doing things they shouldn't. And culture gets this wrong all the time. As we start adding to the zeitgeist and adding to the conventional wisdom, we get it wrong. Sometimes we get it wrong with huge consequences, right? And as a result, we have to do a cultural shift to kind of reset our expectations. This is what we're facing in the building industry. We've been building the same way for literally 200 years, little sticks. The sticks don't really have much support, so we have to add shear to them. They don't have any insulation value, so we have to add insulation. They have no waterproofing, so we have to add the waterproofing. The waterproofing is ugly, so we have to add cladding on top of it. Does it work? Yeah, but it only really works because it's so commonplace, because everybody knows it. But if we were to step back and look at it as a system, it kind of fails. It's a huge drain on resources and energy, and every building has to be put together a little bit at a time. And then eventually it leads us to the ultimate conclusion of this. This is in Palm Springs, by the way. This, if anything, is a testament to mankind's just ability, just through brute force, to make something work. But on the other hand, we should probably step back and say this probably shouldn't exist. And buildings are full of these examples of things that probably shouldn't exist. Obvious issues that are going to come back later and haunt you. So in comes sustainability. Sustainability is the ultimate opportunity for us to expand the conversation and look at how we can use innovation as a strategy to rethink some of those assumptions of the past. My firm does half of the work that we do is healthcare related. And we're doing healthcare projects today that we don't know if they're going to be obsolete in even just 3 years. And not only do we not know, our clients don't know. So we're designing them with a certain flexibility to try to anticipate this great big unknown. That's how much the healthcare industry is changing. And it's not just because of COVID, just basically ever since 2008 and Obamacare, the entire healthcare industry has kind of been on pins and needles, not sure where they're going to be in 3 years. So too, can you say that about the home building industry? We can't possibly build enough homes fast enough, quick enough, cheap enough. And yet house prices keep expanding, and probably the number one complaint people have around their city, and the part of the reason why they leave. You could take the same thing around resiliency. Most people don't have a plan around resiliency. Most cities have no resiliency strategy. For most people, their resiliency strategy is luck, I guess, hoping that it goes around you. And so what we're left with is a lot of problems in terms of the sustainability story. And this is the bad news portion of the talk, and your little faces are going to get very depressed very quickly. But let me just show them to you. First of all, we've got about 1.6 million people per week added to cities. That's 92 billion square meters that we need to build globally in the next 15 years or so. We need to build a lot of stuff for a lot of people in a very short period of time. And we don't have the ability to do it. The old way of building is not going to scale. At the same time, the United Nations says that we have about 60 harvests left until our soil degrades to the point that we can't feed everybody on the planet. I kind of plan on still being alive 60 harvests from now, and so do you. And so that's kind of troubling. As a result of this, they're already projecting that about 200 million climate refugees are going to be around by 2050. Just to give you a sense of scale, 200 million was the entire population of the world at the peak of the Roman Empire. So that's kind of mind-blowing number. And I think most people think of climate refugees as, poor brown people. That's not what this is going to be. I'm talking about Americans, Europeans, everybody. This is going to affect everybody pretty proportionately everywhere. This is the latest climate data. This is from Scripps. This is my computer updating it in real time. So this is the latest number. This is the carbon level in the atmosphere around the entire planet, 416 parts per million. The last time carbon was this high was 2 million years ago, and there were trees at the South Pole. So it's never really been this high before. This is kind of an unprecedented amount of carbon in the atmosphere. And the red line is where we need to be. And half of that carbon was emitted just in the last 30 years, just to give you a sense of scale. Since it is 2020, I put together kind of a best of list for the decade. You know how people do. and their favorite music, their favorite movies. I put together my favorite climate catastrophes of the decade, just so you could share them, because this is what I do for fun now, because that's how messed up I am. So let me show you my best of for the 2010s. Just in the last decade, the 5 hottest years on record were the last 5 years. And that's going to be something that we're just going to say now, because 2020 is nowhere near done, but it's going to be one of the 5 hottest years on record. I can already tell you that. In addition, 18 of the 19 hottest years on record have all occurred in this century. In California, 4 of the 5 largest wildfires in California history all occurred in this decade. And eventually it'll be 5 out of 5, I have no doubt. We've had 6 Category 5 hurricanes that tore through the Atlantic region just in the past 4 years. That's never happened before. And unfortunately, it's a record that is now expected to be broken. At the same time, the Arctic sea ice cover dropped 13% to its lowest extent ever, just in this last decade. And all of the 100-year floods are now considered 5-year floods. By the way, that doesn't mean a flood that occurs every 100 years. A 100-year flood technically is a flood that in any year you've got a 1% chance of it happening. Now you've got a 20% chance of it happening. That's really what that means. At the same time, we've had more than $100 billion size level climate disasters, and this is double from the decade before. In that same decade, we pumped a record 40.5 billion tons of CO2 in the atmosphere, and now we're on track for at least 3.5 degrees Celsius of warming. And just so you know where we need to be, our target was initially 1.5 degrees. We're not going to get to that. Now our new target is 2.5 degrees. We're probably not going to get to that. 3 degrees centigrade is, life on Earth changes dramatically. I know, I look at your faces. I'm like Debbie Downer. This is why nobody invites me to dinner anymore. I get it. It's all depressing. It's all bad news. And you have to remember that for this last decade, all of our projections have been on the optimistic side, because all the climate scientists didn't want to freak everybody out. So they always assume the best in people. But you can't assume the best in people, because I don't know if you've met people, but most people, not you, but most people are douchebags. They're terrible people. And so this idea that we're somehow going to be profoundly better people, that we're going to suddenly come to our senses and change our ways, I've given up on that. I don't know about you, but I've given up on that idea that we're just going to miraculously become a better civilization. I don't think that's going to happen. Instead, let's just force it on everybody. That's kind of my mindset right now, because we don't have any time left, right? We keep talking about 2050 and 2030. Really, it's now. I was in a meeting 2 weeks ago, and I shouldn't say who the client was, but it was a huge organization that you've all heard of. Let's put it that way. And in the meeting, they said, our goal is to be carbon neutral by 2020. And I said, it's April 2020, right? Like, this is 2020. And she started to laugh and say, oh my God, I've been saying that for 10 years. I totally forgot. That's what most climate goals are. They made them a long time ago. They became marketing speak, bullet points that they recite over and over again, and they kind of lose sight of it. So they quickly scrambled and changed their date to 2025. And so I said, okay, well, 2025 is in 44 months. What are we going to do for each of those 44 months to get you there? That's what change looks like. Change is hard. And we as humans, I don't think we're wired for change. I think, if anything, we're wired for just laying on the couch, really. It's kind of how I think we're set. And change is difficult. And I know, because I've done a lot of change as a weird hippie environmentalist person. I drive an electric vehicle. Our house is completely powered by renewable energy. We try not to eat beef anymore. We eat a lot of chicken, but no beef. We buy organic and healthy. I offset all my flights. I'm the guy that brings the reusable bags to the grocery store. And after doing all this, do you know what I have to tell you about all this change? It's actually really annoying. It's a big pain in the ass. It's troublesome. It's a terrible value proposition. I get it. People don't like change. I don't like change. Nobody does. And when I talk about change at a corporate level, most people assume that really I'm asking them to turn into this. And that's not what change. I mean, if you want it to be, great, but this is not really what change has to be. Change can be something else. And so what I've seen is that people are in 2 different camps. Camp number 1 is the people who are scared of the science. They can read the writing on the wall. They can listen to the experts and realize, oh my God, we have to change. We don't have a choice. And the other camp are the people that are scared of the change. I don't buy into that philosophy that half the country is a bunch of slack-jawed yokels that don't understand. I think they understand. I just think they're terrified of the change. And I get it. We are not wired for change. We are literally not wired in our brains for change. That's not how it works. We have a bunch of mechanisms of our brains trying to protect us and keep us safe. And change is one of the ways that makes us less safe. It's our brains trying to keep us alive. That's why your brain's constantly talking, don't do that. Just stop, just sit on the couch and, you know, eat some Fritos. That's all you need to do. That's your brain trying to protect you. I get it. So you're not wired to change, and you're certainly not wired to innovate. And I accept that. So how, in that context, do you do something incredible that never has been done before, like innovating our way to zero carbon, when everything in our brains is telling us, don't do that, stop doing that? That's the challenge. And so a large part of my sustainability strategy to my company and all 1,200 people and all 20 offices and all of our clients and the millions of square feet that we affect every year is really bordering on the psychological approach. I read this book called The Essence of Decision. It's about the Cuban Missile Crisis. It's a good book if you're into history. But what was striking about it was that part of the challenge with the Cuban Missile Crisis was not finding an innovative course of action. The trouble was that the leaders wanted approval rather than advice. They wanted their bosses to like what they were doing rather than give them feedback. They were afraid of the feedback. So they weren't soliciting innovative ideas. They just wanted to kind of get to the next stage. Again, it's your brain trying to survive. So knowing that, how do you overcome that? So I want to tell you a story. There was a great architect named Sir Christopher Wren, and he was the architect of St. Paul's Cathedral in London. And one day when he was touring the site, looking at the building going up, the great big dome going up, he looked at 3 stonemasons that were working away, and he said to one of them, "What are you doing?" And one guy said, "Oh, I'm not going to do the English accent, but he said, "I'm cutting stone." And then he turned to another one and said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm earning a wage." And then he turned to a third one and said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I, sir, am building a great cathedral." Every leader can relate to this. If you instill in them a great, big, clear vision and you share that with your people, it changes how they do their work. You get everybody striving to build the great cathedral. So that's how we get a company to choose innovation. And innovation is something that you have to choose. That's what I'm doing at Canon. That's what we're doing with our clients. I'm not saying, can we please have solar panels, please? Nobody cares about that. What I'm doing is I'm building them a vision of what the building could be. I'm getting everybody in the company to understand how to sell that vision to the clients. Because the vision is gorgeous. The vision is magnificent. Let me show you a sample of what the vision could be, and hopefully you'll be able to hear the audio on this. Hopefully you could hear that. If not, the images are pretty, but
yeah, there's no audio coming through.
No? Okay, forget. Well, you saw the pictures anyway. But the vision are buildings that grow through biology. That's what the audio said. But the reality is different. The reality is really, how do we confine this conventional wisdom? How do we immediately set on a set of solutions? I'll give you an example. I was in a meeting last week. We're going after a very interesting building, and immediately the engineers on the call were trying to solve the problem. Right? How do we get this building net zero? Well, we're going to do this, this, and this, immediately narrowing down. The building itself is an existing building with 12-inch thick masonry walls all around it, big, thick, heavy, ugly walls. The walls don't really have any value except holding things up. They have no insulation value. There's no windows in them. So the engineers started planning how they were going to punch holes through these big, thick, 12-inch thick walls. And just as a matter of exercise, I said, well, why do we even touch the walls at all? Why don't we just build internal courtyards? And those will be light walls that go up to the sky, and we can make them as big as we want, and they won't cost anything. And instead of blowing our entire budget punching holes in existing walls, we can use it instead for healthier buildings. And the walls themselves can just stay there. That's the trouble. Everybody wants to solve the problem, and sometimes you have to step back and say, well, is this the right problem to be solving? What I've discovered is that the level of conformity in any organization is really in inverse proportion to its ability to be creative. So anytime you start sniffing out someone just conforming to a traditional way of thinking, a conventional approach, stop yourself and realize that it's immediately limiting your creative ability. You might not know how, but just kind of trust that and then step back. I'll give you another way of looking at it. Instead of trying to reinvent the wheel and make a better wheel and iterating the wheel, sometimes it's helpful just to step back and say, do we even need wheels in the first place? Are we even using the wheels for what we want? This is how you start to question conventional wisdom, by just kind of taking a step back and taking a bigger approach and then reassessing the question. Because all of us are wired to try to solve the problem. Again, it's your brain trying to keep you alive. It's the reason why we have all of these weird meetings that don't really need to exist. It's our brain trying to keep us alive. So what I'm asking you to do is try to just take a step back and ask the larger question and ask the innovative idea. What I've discovered is a lot of people have the same idea, but they're afraid to ask it. If you find that you're afraid to bring up an innovative idea, I just want to remind you of something. At some point, somewhere in the world, somebody said, hey, let's make a film with a tornado full of sharks. Someone said that, and then they did it. So the next time you're afraid to bring up an innovative idea, just remember that that happened, and maybe you don't need to be afraid much anymore. Just the fact that that exists. And I think about that all the time. Like anytime I'm like, should I say this or not? No, Sharknado. And I immediately just, yeah, why not? Screw it. Sometimes corporate innovation comes to us when we don't want it. Sometimes even when we don't need it, really. And sometimes corporate innovation was, clearly something that shouldn't have happened in the first place. I get it. But sometimes it brings us something so unique and so interesting and so profound that we didn't realize, how could you ever have lived without it in the first place? Right? That's the beauty of innovation. By the way, in my last live talk that I gave, I was in Wisconsin in March, and it was right before, it was the 13th, so it was right before everything shut down. I showed this slide, and then afterwards, a whole group of the audience ran to KFC and bought this, and then they texted me pictures of them eating it. That's a true story, which I found hilarious. All right, so how does this all come together? About 3 years ago, United Airlines had an incident you all might remember. On flight 3411, a flight was oversold, and it somehow led to a passenger, Dr. Dow, getting beaten and bloodied and dragged off the plane. And since all of us have essentially video cameras in our hands all the time, this was captured by thousands of videos and then shared throughout the internet. The CEO, Oscar Munoz, failed 3 different times to try to control the situation, at one point even calling Dr. Dow disruptive and belligerent and blaming him for getting beaten. And United's market value fell $1 billion in a week. How on earth could company policy lead to a passenger getting bloodied and beaten? Contrast that to almost exactly a year later, Southwest Airlines had their own bad thing happen. In this case, a piece of mechanical equipment broke off the engine, hit a window, broke it open, and a passenger was sucked out of the window. Passengers rallied and held on to her as they made an emergency landing, and unfortunately, she died in the process. Having landed and gone through this traumatic experience for everybody, the CEO didn't try to control the situation, didn't try to spin it, and didn't try to care about the shareholders. Instead, Southwest did what it does best. Baked into their DNA was this notion that we love our customers. They didn't seek board approval. They didn't have to get budget approval. They didn't go through a messaging campaign or damage control. They just leapt into action. The CEO reported on the facts and nothing else and said, we'll get back to you once we know more. And that was it. And there were 144 passengers on that plane, and 144 Southwest employees jumped up and each grabbed one passenger and said to them, I am your point of contact. I'm not taking care of anybody else but you. This is my personal cell phone number. If you're hungry, I'll get you food. If you're thirsty, I'll get you something to drink. And if you need counseling, I'll get you that too. But whatever you need, I'm here with you. They didn't care about the cost. They didn't care about the impact. They weren't thinking about that because baked into their DNA was the simple message, we love our passengers. That was it. Their stock didn't fall at all. And despite the tragedy, they weathered the storm, and all the passengers got what they needed in a very traumatic, tragic event. That's what it means to think outside of conventional wisdom. That's what it means. So if you're, like me, a sustainability director for a large company, what do? Do you make a bunch of policies that everybody has to jump through, flaming hoops that they have to jump through? Do you make a bunch of checklists that everybody has to fill out every time they do a project? No, because they're not going to do it anyway. You open up the conversation around how to be more creative and more innovative. This is how companies have failed in the past, because they've made all these weird flaming hoops. For most companies, they build sustainability over here on the outside. It's a department, usually under marketing, believe it or not, and not at all integrated with the rest of the firm. And every large firm has done this. And they all have their cute little web pages touting their sustainability department. But really, it's a policy of if the client asks for it. If the client walks in the door and asks for a green building, oh, here's our sustainability department. But otherwise, that's all they get. And that level of thinking was prevalent at Canon before I came there. And as you know, the same old thinking is just going to produce the same old results. So that's what you need to change, pushing back on that. How do you bake sustainability into everything that we do? Design itself is about constraints. Constraints of budget, constraints of schedule, constraints of imagination. Isn't that what sustainability is? Another constraint? So as I've told everybody on our team, I don't want them thinking in terms of waiting for the client to ask. I want them pushing on every project, because ultimately our deliverable is not a bunch of drawings. Our deliverable is the thought process that goes into that. Thinking is our deliverable. This is not something I worked on. This came from the Mass Design Group. They did the study and found that the rates of C-section in a hospital ward can vary radically from hospital to hospital. Some hospitals have as low as a 77% rate of cesarean section, and some as high as 70. And they found that the same facilities kept having high rates of C-section, and they didn't know why. And it turns out it's the design. The design of the hospital ward increases or decreases the likelihood of a woman getting a C-section. And so Mass Design Group did this study trying to understand why. Design affects outcomes. And so that's the premise that we're going with for innovating. Sorry, I'm going to skip this section. Don't mind me. All right. The trouble is, how do you explain that to people when sustainability itself is so muddied? For example, remember when you used to go to the store? Remember that? Like a month ago? And you go to the store and they say, well, do you want paper or plastic? And you start going through a philosophical dilemma. Well, plastic's made of oil and that's bad, but paper's made from trees and I think that's bad too. And I don't know what to pick here. And then the cashier chimes up and says, or do you want a reusable bag? And you're like, oh my God, what do I do now? There is no clear black and white yes or no. They each have pros and they each have cons. Same thing with our food, right? When I was growing up, I was told that an apple a day keeps the doctor away. But I was also told that, oh, don't eat the skin anymore because that's where all the pesticides are. But the skin is where all the fiber is, but also the pesticides. And now I don't even want the apple anymore. You see what I'm saying? Same thing with tuna. Tuna is good for you. It's got all those omega-3s. You need those omega-3s. Oh, but it also has mercury. Okay, do I eat it or not? And don't even get me started on almond milk. You know what I'm talking about? So this is the trouble. The sustainability narrative is so muddied that selling it to people is awful. When I was, growing up, everything that I was told was good for me is now turned out to be bad for me. Red meat, milk, college, all those things that were supposed to be good for us are bad for us. That's the trouble. And this is why the sustainability story has become so messy. This is why you see really covers like this, just not really explaining the situation, where you kind of look at it either way. This is also the same reason why we were able to ban straws, but not guns. You see what I'm saying? Because the sustainability strategy is craving a black and white, easy thing. I've been told that we should be banning balloons, but I'm not going to be the guy to do that. I don't think any of you are either. Who wants to be that guy? So that's why this is messy. The process itself is messy. So I'm not selling them on a sustainability strategy. I'm selling them on an innovation strategy. That's why. And these are my tools. Post-its, note cards, comments, feedback, stakeholder engagement, talking, communicating. and hopefully laughing along the way, hopefully. Because it's not about ideas. Ideas are easy. Ideas are the fun part. I can sit around with you guys and we can brainstorm ideas all day long. That's not the challenge. The challenge is how to implement those ideas and make them happen. So to do that, innovation requires a few things. First of all, innovation requires more communication and more measurement. And we need to build these into feedback loops. So as we're doing them, we can get as immediate feedback as possible. Sometimes the feedback is as simple as just reading the room, talking to people and seeing their faces. And now on Zoom, you can see everybody's face equally. So it's kind of neat. And then lastly, you need a vision, a big vision to sell them on this idea of innovation. The staff themselves need something too. If you want to get them going on innovation, you need to give them room for the innovation. You need to give them time to implement the innovation, and you need to find some way to reward this innovation. That's what's needed to create the conditions to make this happen and block conventional wisdom from creeping in. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, what our clients care about is not money, even though that's one of the metrics they use. What they really care about are their customers or their patients or their students or whatever. So our mission, therefore, has to be empathy. We have to lead and end with empathy, put ourselves in their seat and care about what they care about. And if we don't, that's how we end up with stupid things like this. I'm working on a radiation oncology center, a cancer center right now. And one of the medical professionals on our design team said this at the beginning to us, and it really struck me. She said, you have to understand that everybody coming to this building is terrified. They hate coming here, but they have to, and they have to keep coming here dozens of times. And so that became our kind of guiding principle for how we're designing the space. So it then started to raise the question, what if a building could actually make you feel things? What if the building could actually affect how you felt, your brain chemistry? And it turns out that it's actually possible. There are things that we can do to trigger certain bits of brain chemistry. And in your brain right now is a swirl of things, right? The reason you curl up with a blanket and eat chocolate is because it releases endorphins and serotonin. It makes you feel better. That's why we do it. And we're all slightly addicted to it. So what if we could trigger the building to trigger those responses? I could release serotonin to make you feel calm. I could release endorphins to make you feel happy and boost your immunity. Oxytocin to make you feel welcome and part of the group. Dopamine to make you feel motivated and focused. Or norepinephrine to help you increase focus in a school, let's say. We're starting to experiment with how we can play with these essentially triggers of brain chemistry to really affect how people feel. So I'm not selling them on, you know, hey, you need a living wall because it's cool. I'm selling them on the idea of the experience of that outcome. Sorry, I'm skipping around a lot. All right. We're also playing with how we can use 3D printing towards a path of sustainability, not because it's cool, but because it could make this more affordable or equitable. We're playing with prefabrication as ways to speed up construction and, again, get it in the hands of more people. We're playing with the ideas of automation to look at how we can do this in a better, faster, more efficient, more precise way. And whether we like it or not, automation is going to dominate the construction industry very, very soon. And pretty soon, this is what our sites are going to look like, I think. And if you don't believe me, if you've been watching Westworld on HBO, you can see that they've already kind of pulled into this at the same time. So this is part of it. This is by a company called Finch. They essentially did a parametric floor plan that as you drag it, it automatically does furniture arrangements automatically based on a set of parameters. We're playing with parametric modeling to not only create innovative shapes, but also things that are really focused around daylighting and solar control. So that way, based on the exact location of that building, it can control the exact amount of light that we want to bring in or not bring into the building. And so all of this leads us to our new focus as a company, which is really 6 major things. The first one is what I call radical efficiency. Let's reduce the energy demand. Radical sufficiency. Let's build appropriate technology where we can. Radical simplicity. Let's stop adding corners to everything and just keep it dumb and make it easier. Radical electrification. Let's stop burning things inside buildings. Radical decarbonization. Let's clear the air from the last 100 years of mess. And radical restoration. Let's clean up the sites that we've destroyed in the process. And I started to realize as we do these 6 things, ultimately there's a 7th thing, which is radical community. That if we do these 6 things right, opportunities to build community with each other start to emerge. Okay. The last thing I want to leave you with is this, and I haven't really shown anybody this, so I don't know if it's going to make any sense, but let's give it a shot. And these are our innovation agreements. These are 8 things that I found so far that structure how I kind of facilitate these workshops. And you're welcome to them. You're welcome to add to them. You're welcome to disagree with them, I guess. But essentially, they're built around these ideas. And I'll go through each one very quickly. The first innovation agreement is you need to have authority. You can't change a system that refuses to change. I'm not part of the marketing department in my firm. I'm a principal in the firm, and I report directly to the CEO. That was part of my requirement to be there. I said I can't transform the company unless I have the authority to do so. Number 2, you have to know what the finish line looks like. So set a big moonshot. When we're working with clients, I immediately push for what is your moonshot beyond your expectations. So we're doing a building for a university. What if this was the healthiest building on campus? What would that mean to you? What would that mean to the campus? What would it mean to the students coming to it? What would it look like? How would that change what we're doing by being the healthiest building on campus? So that's the power of setting a moonshot. Number 3, you need to get buy-in. You can't force it on people. So we make very complex ideas simple by really showing them the why, selling them on the benefit of it. I don't sell people on lead or well. I sell them on the benefits that those programs provide. So how would you like to, reduce staff absenteeism? How would you like to boost student test scores? Those are the things people get excited about. And that's how you gather buy-in. Number 4, we focus on the why before we focus on the how. Every time I'm in a room full of engineers, all they want to do is, how are we going to do it? And I have to constantly pull them back like horses. No, let's focus on what we need to be doing first and why we're doing it. And if you can do that, you can start to avoid certain landmines that are going to come along the way. Number 5, since language can become a bit of a trap and a bit of a bias that we all fall into, I find that it's very fun to just kind of invent new words for things. And sometimes the words are gibberish, right? But it's a way to boost creativity. So one of the things I say to, I said this morning, actually, I said, what if we had like a filter wall thingy? And they said, oh, you mean a living wall? I said, no, that's too simple. Like a wall filter thingy. I just left it vague like that because suddenly that starts to open a possibility to everybody that's listening. Number 6, you got to find a balance, right? You can't just focus on the long-term strategy because people will lose momentum and energy and kind of enthusiasm. The wind will kind of blow out of their sails. So you're constantly balancing short-term things with long-term things. And I find that I'm going back and forth. So I'm championing things that happen immediately and telling everybody in the firm, but I'm also setting the big vision of where we're headed and showing how each of those short-term things connect to that larger thing, because I'm constantly, trying to, get everybody excited. Number 7, you don't just throw out the things that are broken. Sometimes there are things that are working, but they're a block to progress. So it really causes me to question everything. This is like Apple's example with the iPod, right? No, there's nothing broken about that. Most companies, in fact, pretty much every company would have just kept milking that product until it died.
Eric, your presentation is gone.
I'm sorry?
No more shit. Your presentation is not being shown.
Yeah, your PowerPoint is down.
Oh, it is?
But you're up, Eric.
Oh, that's weird. All right. Oh, the host did something.
Did I stop this? Oh, wait, hold on.
It said host disabled screen sharing. Okay, here we go.
That was there we go.
Simran.
Maybe there's a picture, not
my
safe for work.
All right, can you see it now?
Yes.
All right, so we don't just throw out the things that are broken. We really look at everything to see if it's a block to progress, because there's a lot of things that are working in the company that might not be. So it just causes us to question all of the assumptions. And then finally, innovation agreement number 8, we need to plan on building it twice. Because first time we build it in our minds, and then we have to test it to see if it works, and then reassess and reevaluate it. So whether it's a plan, whether it's a design, whether it's anything, we kind of build it once, and then test it, and then build it again. All right, I'm going to show you this, even though this is goofy. Standing in your way to implementing innovation is going to be a bunch of biases that people have. And biases they're not bad. They're just shortcuts that we use all the time. It's why, you know, when you go to a restaurant, you can kind of quickly pick what you like because you're biased towards certain foods. I get that. But biases can also be bad, like in cases of prejudice or racism or sexism or something like that. Biases also affect our thinking. So for example, if I give you a word scramble, there are certain things in your bias that you're going to start picking up. So for example, who can tell me what the first word is? Does anybody have an idea?
Venus.
Wrong. It's spine. Weird perverts. That's your bias. That's your weird, creepy bias. What about the second word? Anybody have an idea of what it would be?
Oh my God.
Butt sex.
Wrong, but
Subtext.
call me later. Subtext. Thank you. These are your biases. These are basically affecting your thinking. And all of you apparently need therapy. So that's what biases do. They affect our ability to see things clearly. And so your job as a facilitator of innovation, your job is to kind of push them to step back and say, well, wait a minute, don't just assume that. What else could it possibly be? And so the way that we're doing this is I'm selling everybody on outcome. I told the entire staff, if you never mention the word sustainability again, I don't care. What I want you out there is selling benefit, selling the why, selling the outcome. And these are the outcomes that we use. And sustainability is our pathway to achieve these outcomes. But sustainability is a tool, just like anything else. I would no sooner sell a client on sustainability than I would sell them on using AutoCAD or Word or PowerPoint. It's just a tool, that's all. Why do we do those things? And sustainability can give us all of this stuff. And if they want to know how we're doing it, then I'll get into the conversation of tools. But otherwise, I'm focusing on these outcomes. Because what is a client's favorite word? Does anybody know?
No.
Yeah, exactly. No. No is their favorite word, their absolute favorite word in the world. And oftentimes, it's gets in the way of their decision-making process. So if you know that a client's favorite word is no, stop asking them yes questions. If you know their favorite word is no, don't ask them, hey, do you want lead? No. Well, okay, do you want solar panels? No. Do you want a green roof? No, because that's their favorite word. Instead, ask them a no question. Hey, do you want to keep paying $40,000 a month in electricity like you have been doing? No. Okay, then we're going to do a net zero energy project. No problem. Don't ask them, do you want lead? You say, do you want to keep having sick employees? And they go, no. Okay, then we're going to implement a healthy material strategy everywhere. I'm selling them on the outcome. And if I sell them on the outcome, they get excited about those outcomes. They're baked into the project from the start, and they don't get removed later for budget reasons. They don't get value engineered out. Basically, what I'm doing is I'm reframing the question and just blowing it right back in their face. That's what I'm doing. And anytime you have a client that does this, if they start to protest, I have a very simple tool to shut them down, which is when they say, well, what if it doesn't work? You just ask them, how many green buildings have you built? And they're inevitably going to say, well, none. Oh, so you don't really know what you're talking about then, right? Is that what you're saying? And that shuts them down. And granted, this might make them upset. But that's okay, because I find this idea of us not doing something for fear of something that may not happen, but not likely, but we preemptively stop it from happening. I call that phenomenon front lash. It's the opposite of backlash. But we're not doing something for fear that it might happen, even though it never happened. There is no backlash because it never happened. So this is front lash, right? That's basically what we're doing here. It's again, it's using words in a very creative way. Because as we know, green is not the same to everybody. Some people don't understand it. And this is going to drive you crazy. So that's fine. So the last two things I want to leave you with are this. First, 5 strategies you can use for innovation right now in your company today. The first one is immediately take control of the agenda. Whatever meeting you're in, whether it's with a potential client, a current client, a past client, whatever, I immediately seize the agenda and add these kind of discussions around innovation immediately. What are our assumptions? What are our biases? What are we doing ahead of time? With really a push for face-to-face interaction. Any phone call I try to turn into video or in person. And luckily in the COVID world, it's getting much easier to get people on Zoom. But really, I want to see their face because 90% of communication is nonverbal. So let me use that tool. Second, I want to set a moonshot right from the start. So we're having a meeting to talk about your building. What if it was the healthiest building on campus? What if it was a building where your employees never got sick? What could that moonshot be? What's important to you? And let's define that success for them right away and get them excited about that big outcome, because that starts to galvanize every discussion around innovating to that end goal. Number three, whatever they give you, if you're a graphic designer and they come in asking for a logo, if you're an architect and they come in asking for a building and everything in between, it doesn't matter. Push back on that program. Really kind of question, well, why are you doing this? What do you need here? We've had clients that have come in and asked for 5,000 square feet of filing space. And I said, you don't need 5,000 square feet of filing. That's a lot of filing. That's an expensive filing space. And they go, oh, no, we need it. We did a study. So what I did was I took a piece of Scotch tape and I put it over all of their filing cabinets when they weren't looking. And then I came back a week later, none of the tape had been broken. And when I pointed out to them, you know, you haven't used your filing room in at least a week. They're like, really? And so that got them suddenly to open up to the idea of not setting around 5,000 square feet of valuable space for filing and moving all that offsite. So push back on the program, the basis of design, the owner project requirements, whatever they give you, feel that you should push back on it. That's how you start to, you know, kind of question some of those assumptions. Fourth, everybody on the team needs to feel empowered to push for innovation. The project managers need to push at every stage, but everybody in the team needs to feel that they're invited to innovate. So you need to basically say to them, I want your innovative ideas. And you actually need to say that out loud. And number five, you don't just do it at the beginning, and you certainly don't do it at the end. You have to constantly be pushing for assuming everything and questioning innovation to make better projects. And the last thing I want to leave you with is this, just kind of 3 questions just to think about to get you started. 1, what are the metrics your clients would most love to measure that they're not measuring now? Number 2, what is the data that you'd most want to measure on a completed project, whatever that would be? And third, what is the one new service you'd want to offer to your clients in this context? Those 3 questions alone will start to spark innovation amongst yourselves and amongst your clients and amongst your colleagues. And again, it's straight from my kind of playbook of what I'm doing at Canon. Okay, that's what I wanted to share with you. Thank you so much. If you want to get more, you can text the word green to that phone number. That's not my phone number, by the way, so don't send me weird pics. But that's just an automated number. But if you text the word green to that number, you'll get an automated response, and I'll be able to send you the slides. Otherwise, that's my presentation. How am I doing on time?
We're going to open it up to some questions. So we could probably have like 10 minutes of questions, if that's okay with Eric.
Sure.
So if anyone has a question, you can raise your hand. I put the instructions in the chat box as to how to raise your hand, and I'll meet you and you can ask your question directly to Eric. And I do see, so I see that Sonia asked if there's any chance that they could have a copy of the slides.
Sure.
Do you want to send this over to me and I can email them out to everybody?
Yeah, I'll send you a link, and here I'll put the number back up too. So if you text the number, text the word green to that number, then I'll have your email and I'll be able to send you the slides as well. But I'll give them out to everybody.
Okay. And I see that Laura has a question, so I'm going to unmute her and go ahead, Laura. You can ask away.
Hi, Eric.
Hey.
So I'm curious. I feel like so many architects and especially manufacturers right now are kind of flooding architects and clients with all these new solutions, and like, what is the office? I work on offices, so what's the workspace going to look like, you know, in a post-COVID world? And I'm kind of concerned about potential backslide, especially on the kind of materials health and environmental side of things. Like, I feel like everyone's talking about antimicrobial everything, and
right.
I feel like I see that one the most. So what are your thoughts on that, and how can we prevent backslide just based on kind of, you know, this like alarmist response that people are having and designers are having with
well, first of all, tell me about it, because, you know, clients keep saying to us, oh, I read on Huffington Post that copper prevents growth of the virus, so let's make everything out of copper. You know, it's like, Jesus Christ. I think that's part of our job, is to push back on them, right? This, I noticed this phenomenon years ago. There was a big fire in the Oakland Hills in San Francisco, Some of you might remember. And a lot of people lost their homes. And when they went to rebuild, their first instinct was, just give me back what I lost. And I said to them, yeah, but how could you make it better? I mean, surely the house that you lost wasn't perfect. This is your chance. You can build whatever you want. And so I found that I had to constantly remind them of that, but also be kind of cognizant and empathetic to their emotional thing. And so I think we're feeling that with the workplace strategy people, right? I just want to get back in the office. I just need to get out of my house. My kids are driving me crazy. I can't wear yoga pants anymore, whatever. I haven't worn a bra in a month, whatever you're hearing. So they just want to get back to the office and they just want to resume the project. But in a post-COVID world, we can't really do that. So we're trying to pivot. So when they say we want everybody 6 feet apart, what are you really trying to solve here? And could barriers do the same thing? Or could we rethink some of the assumptions around the mechanical system and not blow air on everybody? Could we rethink some of the assumptions around operable windows? So to me, it's an opportunity to have more sustainability because suddenly I'm getting them to a place of being open to possibilities that they might have shut down previously. And so we had projects that were right in the middle of, corporate offices for people, and we're right in the middle of the design. And they want to have this reactionary response of, everything is an antimicrobial, toxic, whatever. And I think your job is just to keep pushing back on them, which is hard. But, sometimes using the words like, let's not be reactionary is a good thing to kind of make them realize, well, wait a minute, what are we really going for here? I know that at some point we're gonna return to offices again and movie theaters again. It's hard to imagine that now, today. But it's gonna happen. And maybe this is our chance to rethink some of that. The words I've been using, and Laurel, I think you saw me post this on Facebook, right? Which is, we're never going to go back to normal, but normal wasn't really working for me anyway. So this is our chance to invent a new normal, and maybe that's the premise that you use to spur these discussions.
Thank you for that, Eric. Is there anyone else that has a question right now?
I have a quick question.
Oh, go ahead.
I can't see anybody.
Hi. So my question is, I hear, or in terms of commercial real estate, nowadays, because of COVID and especially after COVID, there will be fewer and fewer, I guess, retail companies or like those entrepreneurs who are going to go into commercial real estate, meaning there will be more vacant spaces, like, I guess, after COVID than ever before. In which case, what are your thoughts on how to best kind of make those space like as green as possible? Kind of like rethink what's going to happen to those space and like make those like a place that's like more livable, or like any kind of ways to like start thinking about those kind of issues.
Well, that's a great question. I don't know. We've been having conversations with clients about what if, is it out of the realm of possibility that every mall would end up being apartments in the next 10 years? Is it out of the realm of possibility that every office would suddenly not have cubicles anymore, but be flexible spaces that are bathed in UV light to sanitize them every night or something? We're using this as a chance to really elevate the conversation to the what if this, what if that, with an eye towards flexibility. But flexibility is also adding cost. On the healthcare projects, for example, normally in a hospital, something like 15% of the rooms would be intensive care unit rooms, ICU rooms. That's kind of that was the average. Now every hospital is like 100% of the rooms have to be convertible to ICU within 10 days, or like they're reacting, they're being drastic about it. And we're kind of pushing back on them a little, saying, well, let's, kind of like Laurel's question, let's not be reactive to it. I don't know. We're kind of inventing it as we go. But I find that by kind of stepping back and being dispassionate about it, it helps. But it's crazy. I think I don't know if you've been paying attention to what's been going on in Sweden, but they opted to just do a herd immunity strategy where they're like, nobody's going to stop going to restaurants. Let's just see what happens. And their death rates went a little higher than everybody else. But also they're kind of ending up at the same place where we all are anyway. So I think we're going to learn a lot in the next 2 months. And what a kind of an exciting time to be alive, where suddenly we know we're going to learn a lot about ourselves as a culture in the next 2 months very quickly. So I'm kind of looking forward to that in a weird way. I don't know if you've ever been to like Minneapolis, but Minneapolis it's a weird place. It's beautiful, but it's a weird place in that all winter long they're trapped indoors, and they have these weird walkways that connect every office building to every other office building because nobody wants to go outside ever. And then in the summer they go insane, like they're just outside all the time in the summer because they've been cooped up all winter. I think that's going to happen nationwide now.
Kind of like
And
Toronto
suddenly,
has that underground town.
yeah,
I don't know
Toronto and Montreal have the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I think you're going to see a collective nationwide, thing where everybody's just going to be busting outside. But I think it's also going to lead to some great innovation around restaurants and culture and bars and offices and everything. I don't know.
Shen Shen has a question also. Let me just unmute you. There we go. Shen Shen, go ahead and you can ask away.
Hi, Eric.
Hi.
So my question is about prostruction. I think that's what you called it. So essentially like growing buildings and things like that. So let me know if maybe this isn't the right form for it. But I'm curious what sort of timeline you see for that. Like, is it something that's going to be, 10 years from now, 20 years from now? Like, I hope it's certainly in our lifetimes.
So what she's referring to is something I've been working on for the last 5 years, which is the idea of manipulating DNA to grow materials and eventually whole buildings. The timeline is annoying because we have all the pieces available, right? So there are a handful of companies that are growing bricks, for example, out of mushrooms. They're manipulating the DNA of mushrooms to grow bricks in a mold, and then they're essentially killing the mushrooms at the end and then injecting other things into it. But right now, today, with no further anything, I can give you a grown brick that has certain features. Maybe it's bioluminescent and glows in the dark. Maybe it absorbs certain toxins, but that's it. That's all I can do. What I wanted to do is I want to just kind of go bloop and have it grow into a brick without a mold, without any sort of interaction. And that technically would be a 10-year timeline. But that's why I was talking about it, to try to incentivize people to do it. There's synthetic biologists out there that have been talking about it for 30 years. There's architects that are working on it, like me, and trying to implement these ideas. And right now I'm at the point of really just trying to get a grant together and give someone, have someone pay us to just make it happen. That's kind of where I am mentally, but it's possible. What's interesting about it is at the same time you have scientists that are trying to grow organs. Mm-hmm. So imagine if God forbid, your mother or father needed a new liver, whatever. They could essentially take stomach cells from their body that are healthy and then program those to grow into a liver, and then implant a liver that wouldn't get rejected because it's basically their liver. It's a clone of their liver. And that liver could even be improved to do other things. That's the bleeding edge of what's possible, but not being done yet because there's all these FDA clearances and approvals that need to happen. If we start growing building materials, we can pave the way for lots of those other bigger innovations to happen. If we start to get used to using synthetic biology to grow things, it could really pave the way to lots of other, life-saving strategies. So that was kind of, that's part of the reason why I'm so excited about it. But also the idea of why are we building such carbon-intensive, wasteful buildings in the first place? Let's just do what nature does and grow them. And that's the amazing part, is it's all possible. That's what kind of blew me away. And when I first started this 5 years ago, finding that it's doable and starting to see examples of it, it's exciting. But if you guys are curious about that, you can email me and I'll send you some articles and videos to watch.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Well, that's time now. I don't see any other questions unless there's one last question. But this was a great talk. It was really informative, funny, great presentation. Thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to like when we're going to be opening up again and having events open up again and have you here in person in our space.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
Yeah.
Well, sorry I can't be all with you in person, but hopefully in the near future.
Yeah, soon, so that everyone can laugh together.
Yes.
This event has been recorded. It's going to be going up onto our Facebook and YouTube pages tomorrow. I'll put the links in, again, in the chat box. And yeah, thank you. And I hope to see you guys on another event soon. Take care.
Thank you.